Military history. There's going to be a couple of battles that you are going to definitely have to know when everything's said and done. I'll say there's three major battles you're going to know. One of them actually isn't quite as monumental. It'll probably be the one we end up with Bunker Hill. And then tomorrow we'll go over the two that you must definitely know with Saratoga and Yorktown. We actually touched very, very little upon most of the battles. Most of the history, if you were to look at things for the Revolutionary War, is the Americans losing time and time again. So it's not that we just want to look at our wins. We did win, and it's important. But this first section actually isn't so much about military. Changes in the government during the war. When these countries, our 13 different states or countries, broke away, they made their own government. Each state and each country made their own laws. And there's certain things that they would put in that are, again, we'll come back to this idea, American ideals. One of the things they had was they abolished any titles that you could have. So, yes, your daddy might call you a princess. But in the United States, and we will hold this in the Constitution, you cannot be given that title. Sorry, Bruin. All right, you cannot be a princess.
Ooh.
Okay?
You're right. King.
Queen.
If they looked at each other as countries, how did Britain look at them? Did Britain look at them as they're all like Britain too?
They looked at them as a bunch of unruly children that needed to be disciplined.
So
Well,
it's like
that's what
countries or colonies.
And they looked at them, and Britain pretty much had them, again, as individuals. And this is where the whole idea that even early on with the Dominion of New England and the Albany Plan of Union, Britain knew they didn't want to unite them together. So they were wanting to show. And Britain will try to. Their whole plan is to kind of separate these different groups. All right, another thing they all have. Mentioned yesterday that one reason why people would be loyalists was they would not want to be, if they were working for the Church of England or the Anglican Church. Well, the reason being is that was the official Church of England. Taxpayer money went to the Anglican Church. When they broke away, they told the Anglican Church, you're on your own. You're just like any other denomination of church, which is our idea of separation of church and state. And these individual colonies would do that. A list of rights, which a lot of these rights will later on be put into our Bill of Rights. Separation of power into three branches. Well, that happened in our country later on. So we have a lot of the formation we're looking at in the future. And we will extend the right to vote. Not very far, but we will extend it then instead of the richest, we'd actually go to some places where if you were just a white landowning person, you did not have to have a large amount of property. So, but it would be an extension of people that vote. Or, yeah, that could vote. All right, women dare to vote, or during the war. One SFI you need to know of is camp followers. Any guess of what they did?
Followed the.
Yeah, as the army camp went from place to place to place, they followed it. Now, what type of women are going to follow around a whole bunch of soldiers?
Okay. No, I mean ladies, man.
Actually, it's going to be not single women. It's going to be wives and daughters. And this is where, yes, there will be, as some of you were thinking, there will be some prostitutes that will come. If you have a couple thousand men in some area, you'll have. One thing about our army, and Washington's army in particular, a lot of it was made up of people that had nothing to lose. And we would look at it today, sometimes it's homeless families. And the entire family would come and be part of that army. And as they moved from place to place, they would go with them, the daughters, the wives. And it would be almost like a support network in helping out.
What about the sons? Like you say, daughters and wives.
Well, it'd be smaller children. I mean, it was almost like entire families sometimes that were moving. Now, Molly Pitcher is a story that has been famous for Revolutionary War because she was there with her husband and she was helping out people when they got wounded. And then when her husband got killed, she took over a spot. And you see this painting of this heroic woman that was there and fighting for our freedoms as she took her husband's spot by the cannon. So what's wrong with the story?
They wouldn't let women fight.
Well, for the most part, it wasn't. And actually for Molly Pitcher, it's actually the story of three different women and parts of it combined together. We do know of three different women that in some way or another did do parts of what the major story is for. But the actual Molly Pitcher is a fictional person. I believe the name of the one that actually ended up getting a pension later on from the U.S. government was the lady Deborah Sampson. She was an indentured servant who was kind of joked around. The men kept joking around to her because she could not grow facial hair. And then when she got wounded, they found out that he was a she. And later on, the family, and they had things, and she was able to get a pension from the U.S. government later on. And what?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
So, but, and I'm not sure.
So
Again, I'm thinking, for some reason or another, Deborah Sampson, I might be confusing her with another one of the women that was in sort of Molly Pitcher. But there were some women that actually fought there. But the main thing for women, which we don't have, and this is where when you're writing, you don't have as much of those SFIs concrete with it. But at home, they are maintaining the economy. If the husband is off fighting, the wife is at home maintaining the farm, maintaining the plantation if they're a richer. But a large number of our soldiers are not people that are there year round. They are people that are coming in for a couple of months and then leaving, and in between the season. That's why for Washington, his army ended up being a lot of people that were kind of the rejects. People that didn't have any land, they didn't have any place to go. And Washington would accept them along the way. All right, we're going to look on the advantages both sides. I know it's a little confusing on this top part where I have this, but the major advantage the British had was they had an established military. Not only was it established, their navy is the best in the world. Their army is arguably one of the best in the world. The one army that people said might be better than them was France's, but Britain definitely had the top navy in the world. What did the United Colonies, which became the United States, what did we have for an army?
Pitchforks. Farmers.
We had a bunch of volunteers, and again, the joke was a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers with pitchforks. Military leaders. I mean, Britain had been fighting wars. They have their academies to train their officers. And for America, what do we have for our leaders?
George Washington?
Yeah, we have George Washington. How'd he do?
Loser.
Didn't he surrender a lot?
Well, he lost this one battle that he has for prior. Now, we do have other officers. It's not just George Washington the most, but there were some that had served in the military. Kind of a little side story. We're actually really lucky in some ways because George Washington had really begged his mother when he was young that he was going to be able to take a position in the British Navy. And the mother had decided that she really didn't want him to, and that's where, because Washington really wanted to be he wanted some sort of venture. He did not want to sit at the plantation and run basically the family plantation. And that's why he ended up being a surveyor and going out into the West and surveying that. And talking about something that could change in history because the mom really didn't want him to go away. If he would have gone to the British Navy and just the natural leader that he was, he probably would have promoted up there and would have been fighting against the United States if it wasn't for his mom. So we can thank Washington's mom that he was here.
So she's the real father of America.
Yes.
Sure.
One thing though for the British, even though they had a lot of experience fighting, if you were a top general in the British Army or Navy, are you expected to win when you're fighting these farmers with pitchforks? These Americans? And what happens if you lose?
You don't go home.
Yeah. Basically, your career is ruined. So you really don't have anything to win. And later on in the war, we're going to have France and Spain jump in on our side. If you're Britain, are you going to send your best generals against the French or the Americans?
The Americans.
The French. So pretty much, and what I'm getting at here, a lot of our British leaders, which will help us out, were not the most competent. Many of them were given positions not by their ability or their merit, but because of their family name. So they were promoted up, and all right, even though so-and-so is not that good of a general, all right, it's only going to be fighting the Americans. So we'll give him this position, and it'll help the family. And we will have several cases that it helps for the Americans that they had someone that maybe was not as competent. Battle of Saratoga will be one example. Yorktown, not so much with Cornwallis being bad, but the general that was supposed to come and help out Cornwallis didn't want to leave his nice cozy position in New York and kind of left Cornwallis out to dry. And we're going to see what ends up happening with that. All right, other advantages that the British have. They have an organized government. It is a central government. Now, it is across the ocean, so that spacing hurts it. But what type of government did the Continentals have?
They had more of
that Congress. We've been watching them with that movie. Does that seem like it's real organized?
No.
All right, they will organize the Articles of Confederation, which is our next section of notes, which you're going to find maybe not the best. Financial, Britain has a lot more money. They do have gold. So they are able to buy more supplies. They are also able to hire mercenaries. What are mercenaries?
They're just kind of
hired
fighting.
hired soldier. We're going to have, this is where we're going to find out, Hessians. Okay, the Hessian soldiers are going to be some Germans that they hire to fight for them. They're going to have the help of Loyalists and Native Americans. So where one of the advantages the Americans have is they're fighting on their own land. Well, are the Loyalists fighting on their own land?
Yeah.
Do the Native Americans know that land?
Yeah.
So it could counteract it. Here's where we also get lucky, because a lot of the British officers, they did not trust what the Loyalists said, or they didn't respect the Americans enough. And they would not listen to them. If you saw the movie The Patriot, you can see with the cavalry officer a little bit where he's talking to one of the Loyalists and saying, it is almost like can't believe, not so much that, yeah, you are fighting on the side of the king, but you're fighting against your neighbors. Okay, you're going against some of them. It's almost like, yeah, I respect that you are respectful of the king, but also I have a respect for someone that actually is fighting and what they're fighting for. And you can kind of see some of that attitude that you'll have. But the arrogance of the British will help. I mean, both arrogance and ignorance of their generals and their leaders will help the Americans in their cause. All right, our advantages for the colonies. First of all, the cause. What is the British soldier fighting for?
The king.
Yeah, the king, for their salary. And if you are a German mercenary, what are you fighting for? Yeah, salary, plain out money. Who's going to risk more? Fight harder. Yeah, and this is where you're going to see, and we did Vietnam earlier, but there's a lot of analogies you can look at. Britain is the most powerful country in the world, yet they lose to this United Colonies. America is the most powerful country in the world in the 1960s and 70s, but we lose to Vietnam.
We did not lose. We did not lose.
All right. And actually, did the British lose?
No,
Did
they just kind of stopped fighting.
Or should I say, did the British get beat? Did we as Americans get beat?
No.
It was a war of attrition.
No, and this is where it's a war of attrition. They were, and this is where you kind of look at, how did a group of farmers with pitchforks beat the greatest nation in the world, and how did a bunch of guys running around in black pajamas beat the greatest nation in the world?
They
with
were
the Viet Cong.
Nocturnal.
So, and this is where, and this is why when I come down, I think one of the very last things that I have for advantage. Did the Americans actually have to beat the British in order to win? No, you just have to outlast them, which is kind of what we see for where we have been fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last few years. Do those groups that we are fighting, sometimes I don't even know for sure who we're fighting, but do they have to beat us?
No.
Or do they just have to go and get where they outlast us? All right, the cause is a major thing. Fighting on home ground. Our communication will be key to things. This is where George Washington is going to prove to be a good leader. He will have communication. We'll also have a lot of great spying that he does. The big part that we have is the possibility of help. And they will come. It will take a little while for them to come. And one reason why they will come is one person that was extremely strong is Ben Franklin. After the Declaration is written, he goes to France. And Ben Franklin is a charmer. And the French love Ben Franklin. And he convinces us time and time again to give us more money. And he's kind of going and saying, you need to join, you need to join. And when we get to this Battle of Saratoga, they will then, and he's like, look, Americans we might win without your help. Don't you want to get back for that 7 years war loss? Okay, now you can get in here and join in. And if we look at things, and you look for history, France goes into major economic debt to help the Americans win, to get back for their loss to the British, which that economic crisis that will come from it will lead to the French Revolution. And a lot of that is due to Ben Franklin. And for the military, Washington proves to be, and we'll come back to this at the end, he proves to be the right man for the job. It may not always look like it during the war, but at the end we look back and say he was. And again, do we actually have to beat the British in order to win? No, we just have to outlast them. All right, first phase of the war. In the beginning, we will have Lexington and Concord for the first shots. After that, we will have Fort Ticonderoga in Vermont. Ethan Allen, the Green Mountain Boys, get cans. Now, we glorify them. In many ways, the Green Mountain Boys, today we would call them a gang. They did a lot of illegal activities. Do they want a strong British government, a strong police, to stop them from their illegal activities? Mm-hmm. So if they overthrew the British government, can they get away with more of what they're doing? Yeah. So, again, we glorify some of our patriots, but the Green Mountain Boys are ones that we kind of look at and say, maybe they're not quite so much. But they take over Fort Ticonderoga, they get some cannons, which we don't have many of them, and that's important for the future. We will then have one of the battles you do need to know, the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, it will have the highest casualty rates for Britain in the entire war. Officially, we lose. We are on the top of the hill, we have the position, the British drive us off. But I have a question on, or I have it on there that gave us hope. And this is where the reference that was kind of made to in the movie about how the British made a couple charges and then we had left. The story goes that the soldiers had enough for 3 shots. They actually had a little more than that, but we were very low on supplies. And this is where the British, the story goes that the commander said, do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes. How close do you have to get in order to see the white part of a person's eye?
Really close.
Yeah. And that's why, which we don't know for sure if the commander that's given it actually said that or this is a good story, but more likely because they were so low on supplies, they said, don't waste your shots. All right, don't just be shooting when they're way down there. Wait till they get close enough that you're going to make your shots count. But we hold off the British, but we run out, and even though it might sound scary, it doesn't stop much to yell bang, bang, bang to soldiers when you run out of actually shooting them. So we have to retreat, and the British take the high ground, and they win the battle. But again, they had a lot of casualties. And this is where we kind of look at a what if. And you know how sometimes you might have it if you played a sport and you lost, but it was somebody that you were supposed to lose to, but it was close, and you say, oh, what if? All right, what if Kirsten would have just made that 3-pointer at the end? Okay, sent us into overtime. All right, we could have won at that time. What if we, and this is where for the Americans, what if we had enough ammunition? We could have beat them. We were winning, but we didn't. And it gave the Americans hope with that. Now, the last part for this, where was the Battle of Bunker Hill fought?
Not on Bunker Hill.
Yeah, not on Bunker Hill. It was fought on Breed's Hill. Totally trivial. Do not get caught up into this. The reason why I point this out, we don't know exactly where it came to, but someone that must have wrote, when they were probably on Bunker Hill, asked a local, where are we? Well, we're on Bunker Hill. So we wrote it as the Battle of Bunker Hill. The battle was actually fought on Breed's Hill, right? Basically, as you look over at it. As a person wrote the story of the Battle of Bunker Hill, the story went from their newspaper, it goes to another newspaper, they reprint it, and it gets printed over and over again. Was the outcome any different even though it's Breed's Hill?
No.
No. The reason why I like to point this out is like last night when some of you were doing your last bits of touches on your Make a Case project. If something that you wrote as a reference from the book was wrong, did you know it? Or are you trusting that what you wrote was actually true? And could you have actually written something that was a mistruth, again, in your paper, because that's what you read, you're assuming it. And that's why you kind of look at, sometimes in history, we will have something that is just rewritten over and over again. And that's why, I mean, I know sometimes I like to point out some of these little things that, and that's why I hate to say it for some of our stories, that well, the story's better than maybe the real truth. And there's usually some truth in the background of it. But part of it's to remember. But again, the whole scheme of things, does it matter that it's not the Battle of Breeds Hill? I know for some of you that really want everything concrete, that's where it has. The last, then we will try an invasion into Canada. What happens when we go to Canada?
They kick us back.
Yeah, they kick us out.
They weren't so
All right,
nice.
they defeat us. So, all right, and we'll go to phase 2 of the war tomorrow. We'll stop here. We'll put everything away. With the part of the failed invasion of Canada. Again, the first phase of the war is all being fought in New England. Okay, so if we were to divide this up into 3 phases, phase 2.
I found your phone.
You have it on? Okay. All right. After Bunker Hill, the British decide to move. Even though they technically won Bunker Hill, they knew there was a lot of resistance, even especially in the countryside.
Breed Hill.
Okay, or Breeds Hill, for those of you that want to be exact on it. But it was moved, the British kind of moved to New York for it. Why did the British now center around New York instead of taking it out of New England?
Because New York was on the water and they had a better water defense than they had on land.
And that's part of the reason, because they have the greatest navy, so their army is better off when it is supported by the navy. The ports that they would have, and easier to move troops around using the water. Think New York, New Jersey, which is still take place where we're watching the movie here. They're in New Jersey at that time, in New Brunswick. But there's another reason besides for military reasons that they're looking at, and that is they want to cut off New England. They're looking at New England's the troublemakers. Let's just separate them. So if we go to New York, and maybe then the other colonies will go with. Meanwhile, the Continental Congress, they decide to put in charge of their army George Washington. Why was George Washington chosen? Did they see his image on a penny and decide, hey, you should get it?
A penny?
Were those in a penny? Or no, that's the list, right?
Yeah.
All right, but see his image on a coin and the dollar bill. Yeah.
I think they put him in charge because he wanted that. I think because he had just that natural ability to lead. So.
And that will be one of the reasons. He is seen as a leader. Well, and this is where his writing, he is very negative in his writing. He also exaggerates immensely in his writing. But he is actually a person, and he's kind of like the opposite of Thomas Jefferson. He is a person, he doesn't say much, but when he does say something, people really respect what he has. And by being a leader, he was written as being, looks like a leader. How do you look like a leader?
You stand tall.
Well,
Shoulders
first of
back,
all,
chest
he was
out.
tall. All right, which you think that, but it does make a difference psychologically. All right, people when they are looking up psychologically think of a person as, but he was a person that not only is tall, walks into a room and it's just, there are some people, and George Washington was this way, that he walked into a room and he just people kind of started to naturally look up to him. So that would be part of it. But that's not the number one reason why he was chosen by the Continental Congress. That would be a contributing factor. Yeah?
So the British couldn't have him?
So the British, because he was such a great military leader, right? What was his background and his...
He
Lost.
surrendered.
Yeah, he lost. And actually that was another factor for him. He was chosen some for his experience, because we did not have very many experienced leaders. But that still isn't the number one reason.
Because he actually has something to lose.
Well, and he does have some, but most of the people that are the leaders actually are with that. But yeah, he has a lot to lose also.
They're out of options.
They're out now. It's because he's from Virginia. He's from Virginia. What's so important about putting the person in charge of the biggest army from Virginia?
Because Virginia is the most powerful state.
Yeah, it's the most powerful, most populous, the richest. Right?
They can get all
And
kinds of stuff.
all the fighting so far in the war has taken place in New England. Has anybody else basically stuck their neck out? If you put a Virginian in charge of the army, is Virginia now in this war?
Yeah.
Which is why when they had the movie and they kind of go into this, that they wanted that proposal to come from Virginia. And Richard Henry Lee was proposing for the Declaration, because you need to get Virginia into this. Now, the battle for New York I'm putting as a one large thing. There's a whole bunch of different battles. Brooklyn Heights might be the biggest of it. Time and time again, what is happening with this battle, General Howe will go swing his big army around to go attack the Americans, and George Washington sets his army up and then turns around and runs away. And then might attack a small side of the British army, and the British swing around to come after them, and the Americans retreat. And pretty much that is what's happening. If we look at it like a sport, then we're saying for the Continentals, loss, 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 loss.
We finally got a touchdown.
So, every now and then we'll get that.
I like the Broncos
Also for
right
the
now.
British, one thing about this, they are using Hessians. They are German mercenaries from Hesse, an area of today was part of Germany there, which takes off the Americans of bringing some foreigners in to fight. I mean, you can't even use your own army for it. Washington will not stand up and fight the British on a big major battlefield. Why not? What's his plan? Okay, wear them out. It's not in the contract.
Pick them off.
What?
Pick them off while they're like marching.
Which, yes, it. Okay. And part of his plan is to outlast them along the way. Which ones do you need, framers?
Yeah.
There. And again, it does look bad that he's losing, but it is part of his idea. Now, the two battles that Washington will actually win, the battles of Trenton and Princeton, they are in New Jersey. They are fought in the winter. At that time, you didn't fight battles in the winter. Because basically once the snow fell, basically both armies go to their camps, you wait for spring, and then you fight. But they do cross the Delaware River into New Jersey, which they have to stop for a couple of hours because the guy has to go and make a painting of them while they're sitting there. Which, can you imagine how cold that is when you're sitting there waiting for this painting to get done? Finally, when the painting's over, they get going, which they then cross over into New Jersey and do a surprise attack. Notice the dates of those two battles. When is Trenton fought?
Christmas.
Yeah, Christmas Day. When is Princeton fought? New Year's Eve. Now, they're also not fought against the largest part of the army. They are small parts of detachments of it. And they do a surprise attack. And on Christmas Day for Trenton, there was actually a bunch of these Hessian soldiers. And what do you think the commanding officer did on Christmas Day to help make his soldiers a little happier that they are half a world away from their families?
Prostitutes.
Well, not prostitutes there. A lot of alcohol.
Lots of booze.
All right, and it was when the Continentals charged into the camp, many of those Hessians could not stand very well, much less know where their guns were. And actually, this is one of the things that could have been changed because the day before, one of the spies had given a message to the commander at Trenton that Washington was crossing the Delaware, saw him posing for the picture, and went and gave him a warning. Unfortunately, the commanding officer was playing cards, did not want to be disturbed, and put the message in his pocket and forgot to look at it. All right, and afterwards found it out that could have had that warning that they were coming. New Year's Eve day, they attack at Princeton, same thing. A small group, they win. In the whole scheme of things, these are not major battles. They really aren't militarily that important, but they are victories. It's kind of like when you're on a team that's losing, it's good to play someone easy that you know you're going to win. It's kind of like when University of Florida played Georgia Southern this last season, because you know that's a for sure win to play a little Georgia Southern. Well, maybe not this last year. Sorry, Gators. But this is where it was something that you had. What is, for these two little battles, what will be something that is important? If you want to know what was so important about those two little victories.
Thank you.
Okay, reinforce the spirit, morale, and the dates of them. Because on January 1st, 1777, a large part of his army would have fulfilled their contract. And if you're losing and losing and losing, you're done with your contract, you can now go home. You gonna leave? You've been on this. I mean, Washington's lost and lost and lost.
But when you win, they're not gonna leave.
Yeah, but suddenly you have this moral victory. You won. Things are looking good. Plus, you think back. Wait a minute. Yeah, we lost all these battles, but we're not decimated. We're actually doing pretty good overall. Here. So many of them signed up for another year. That year will be important for the Continental Army. All right, for Valley Forge, this is not a battle. Circle this. Put stars around and say, Valley Forge is not a battle. Too many times on SFI tests, I have this as a battle that Washington won, which it is not a battle. It is a camp. In history, it is known as this terrible, terrible place, terrible winter that they went through, and could not have shoes on. They're wrapping in and their feet in cloth. We know actually it's not quite that bad. About 50, 60 miles away is Philadelphia, and the temperatures that winter were slightly above average. So it was not quite as bad as everything was seen. So where did the stories of how bad everything was in Valley Forge come from?
George Washington.
Yeah, George Washington, where you've seen where these letters are. He exaggerated things trying to get supplies into the camp. Now, it wasn't great conditions, but it wasn't quite as bad as it was there. Now, why important is going to be the next section when we're going to have a person that comes. But before there, one part, and I'll probably show this because they have a good thing telling about this in American Story of Us. But he had it where some of the soldiers started to get smallpox. And that was something, if you have an army, that you did not want that disease to get started, because you may lose half, 3/4 of your army in a couple months. And when some of his soldiers got smallpox, Washington does a very controversial order. We have Hunter that has smallpox, basically look at things, he's not doing too good, then he has these, and they're pox, because of those of you know chicken pox, I mean these swells that come up, and they use the infection there. He orders for healthy people. So Derek, going to take a knife, we're going to cut you, we're going to take that knife, scrape some of the pox off, and put it on you. Which would be some early inoculation, which for a lot of people look at things and say, wait, I know smallpox kills people, you're going to give it to me? And the idea is while you're healthy and your immune system can take a little bit of it, before you catch a cold or pneumonia, you can just sit there, then you have a way to fight it. Cotton Mather had learned that from the Indians for the Puritans, and some of his soldiers would have it, and it ends up that loses only a very small part of his army. But it is something to kind of see. And the trust that the soldiers have in Washington, okay? Because for a common person, you don't do that kind of thing. All right? That smallpox is going to kill you. You mean you're going to give it to me. But it had a trust up here. And this will be part of what we'll end up having with it. You need framers too?
Yes.
The guy that ends up helping, though, is Friedrich von Steuben. He is from Prussia. Prussia is part of what country?
Russia?
Not Russia.
Germany.
All right, von Steuben.
No, you like
He is, today we call him drill sergeant. He was called a drill master at that time. And if you join the Marines, you're going to love your drill sergeant.
You hate your drill sergeant for the first 6 weeks.
During basic training, you hate your drill sergeant. But later on when you're fighting, why is it that you will love that guy that called you every nasty thing in the book and made your life a living hell for 6 or 8 weeks?
Because you know everything he said to you.
Right. He trains it with you, and you are trained properly. And that is what von Steuben did. He came and he was at Valley Forge and trained the Americans how to fight the way the Europeans would. One of the main things he taught them was how to use a bayonet. Why is he joining the Americans?
Because he didn't like Germans. Or
He is German.
Oh yeah.
So he's actually fighting, and even though Prussia and Hesse would be out. All right, Taylor, you're not allowed to answer these.
I want to answer it.
They whispered in my ear.
You have Europe now?
No, give him less power.
No?
Because they didn't like him over there.
Why did they like him?
They didn't
What's
like
wrong with him?
He's German.
No?
He has a disease.
He was gay, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was kicked
I
out of
was
the Prussian
close.
army because he was gay.
I thought you were joking.
And he came to America, and this is where I want you to realize for what Washington and which is kind of a representative of America. He's going to accept the people that are considered rejects of other areas. We promised him if we win, and we actually will give him a chunk of land out west, which he does get, but I think he ends up passing away soon after, so he really doesn't get the reap benefits. But again, Washington will accept it, and actually this is where it comes down to what is made up most of the Continental Army. Yeah, it is. And today we would call it homeless. The reason why we have all these camp followers, they were homeless families. Joke around about an army of shopkeepers and farmers with pitchforks. Our shopkeepers and our farmers were not serving full time in the army. Our farmers would come and serve for a couple of months and then go back and work on their farm. The people that were the army, that were there with Washington year round, were the lowlifes in society, the homeless, the criminals. And this is where Washington will step among them and have them rise up. And again, some of the things you look at, the images that we have for what I did for America, and what we're fighting. And it's also why a lot, again, we look at Washington, someone that is a rich man, but he's going to step right down with the common person, and even the lowest of the common people there, and treat everyone as equals. And that's where, when it comes down to later on, we're going to find that when Washington, the respect that he commands out of Americans later on, even to be president. All right, the turning point of the war will be Saratoga. This is, if you know any one battle, that's the battle you must know. Here, so stars and
Polka dot.
highlighting, polka dot arrows. That's it. There. Now, with this battle, this comes about for a couple of things. First of all, we have a British General, Burgoyne. It's great for the soldiers, but not so great for fighting. Someone that probably should not have been head of the military. Remember, I told you a lot of the British, the best officers are not coming to America. He's a nice guy. If you're in his army, it's great when you're not fighting. All right, guys, we have a march we do. We have to do 20 miles. But at the end of it, he has a cookout. While we're going along, he has a band play to help you get to this march. So you know exactly where he's going. There's no hiding about it, you know, and have things along the way. Again, great if you're in that army until comes time to fight. Because if you're an opposing army, do you like what you know where he's going and where he's going to go as he's setting up ahead? And what happens is we end up defeating him. Now, the two generals that lead the victory are Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. Notice, not George Washington. This is not Washington. Washington does not win the biggest and most important battle of the war. He is not there. Now, some of the soldiers that were at Valley Forge were there, and that's where we some of those techniques learned by von Steuben will be used. But it is Gates and Arnold. And in all reality, Arnold did most of the planning and should have got most of the credit. But Gates got most of the credit, which is one of the contributing factors for what Benedict Arnold is known for later on.
Killing him.
No.
Buying.
He's a traitor.
Yeah, he is known in American history as our biggest traitor, because later on he will go to sell a fort over the Hudson River, where today West Point is located. He would go to sell it to the British. Now, it's his wife's fault. His wife was spending a whole lot of money. The Continentals could not do that. He needed some money, so he went to sell it. It's always the woman's fault. That's what Jimmy Buffett said. Well, first of the song. Don't listen to the end of the song. But this is where part of that it has. A lot of times we look at it and say, well, it might be money. Part of it might be that he feels like he's being slighted. Horatio Gates is getting more of the credit for what he did. Even at the end of the war, afterwards, when he goes to die, his heart's actually more with Americans. He does not want to be buried in a British uniform. He is actually buried in an American uniform. But for American history, he's kind of known as the biggest traitor.
Wasn't his father-in-law a Tory too?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why he had the connections there, and his wife was one that was constantly wanting him to be on the British side. And then for the British, when he joins the British Army, are they going to give him anything important to do?
No.
No. I mean, could you trust someone that just was a traitor at the other side? But the main importance for Saratoga will be the fact that afterwards, we signed the Treaty of Alliance. And once again, this is where you need to know the other name of it also. Franco, as in like France, Franco-American alliance. The College Board will intermix those two together. Franco-American, the Treaty of Alliance. It's between France and the United States. See, Ben Franklin had been over for several months telling France, come on, you need to join. We're going to beat the British. You don't want to be sitting on the sidelines. And basically for the French, they're like, yeah, you're really going to beat them. Okay, and then some news comes of Trenton Princeton. All right, you didn't really beat them here. All right, you surprised some drunk guys. But now the word comes in, the Americans won. They beat the British fair and square, fighting on a field, marching in these straight lines at each other. And France now wants in, and soon after, Spain wants in. Is Britain fighting just America anymore?
Nope.
No, and it is, suddenly the American Revolution is another world war. Just like the 7 Years' War was a world war, so was the American Revolution. And we'll stop there. Okay. All right, turning point was Saratoga. We will go now to phase 3 of the war. After Saratoga, we will have the war shift to the south. Why will Britain shift to the south?
Have more money.
No, it isn't money that they have more of, but there is more of something. There's more loyalists. So here's where you kind of look at things that Britain is realizing. Now, it's going to take a while for France to really, truly get involved. It's not like they say the Treaty of Alliance and 2 days later they're in North America fighting with us. They have to mobilize their troops, get things organized, and before they come to help us. But Britain also has to work out. So what Britain ends up doing is saying we're going to shift a little more of this to the fighting of the Loyalists. They had more Loyalists in the south, so they go towards that area. They very quickly capture all the areas on the southern coast. And this is where, throughout the war, whenever the British wanted to, they could take over coastal cities, having that superior navy. The problem is, the further they get away from the coast, the less luck that they have. After the Battle of Saratoga, George Washington says that Nathaniel Greene needs to be the leader of his Southern Army. And the Continental Congress, which we've seen in the movie, was not the most organized. They didn't put Nathaniel Greene and did not do as George Washington asked. They put the hero of Saratoga, Horatio Gates, in charge. And Horatio Gates was not a very good general. And he will lose several battles. After the Battle of Camden, he was in this, if you ever saw the movie The Patriot, where they have this one scene where they ride along and they ask something about it at there. What happens is that Horatio Gates is known to just be, after the battle, in full pursuit on his horse, getting away from everything, and just basically abandons his army, his staff following behind him, because they were in total disarray. And then the Congress listened to what George Washington had asked, and they put Nathaniel Greene in charge. And you need to know Nathaniel Greene. I don't go much in detail with him, but he will be a person that is very, very capable, an extremely good general, understanding when it is that he should fight, when it is that he needs to back off. And this is where we kind of look at what George Washington was doing, where George Washington's not winning battles, but he's lasting. Nathaniel Greene, though, picks and chooses where to fight along the way. And although he will have a lot of losses, just like George Washington, he's going to have some wins in there, and slowly, and his plan ends up working here. A lot of different tactics, though, used in the countryside, and this is where the movie The Patriot. The Patriot takes place pretty much what would be South Carolina today. It is loosely based upon a general known as Francis Marion, who was nicknamed the Swamp Fox, who he and other volunteers, they hid out in swamps. They would attack and use guerrilla warfare and attack small areas, set up traps. They would wait for the British to come away from the coast and attack them. And Greene used Francis Marion. And the other thing that ends up happening here is another man, and Daniel Morgan. And you see on this map, as they got deeper and they went into North Carolina, into the area along the edge of the mountains, Daniel Morgan was there, and a lot of his fighters were those Scotch-Irish people. And how do you think they liked the English? And where in the movie The Patriot, one of the things that they kind of talk about is how they are shooting officers. And the rules of war at that time, officers could only shoot officers, enlisted men shoot enlisted men. So basically the common people were not allowed to shoot the officers. So the rich were the officers, and it was like almost a gentleman's agreement that they didn't shoot each other. Well, Daniel Morgan did not have that idea. Daniel Morgan pretty much said, find the highest ranking British person and shoot them. All right, and you start working down from there. And the British did not like that because we weren't following the rules of war, weren't being gentlemen. And in the movie The Patriot, they kind of have, with the character Mel Gibson, they blend in some of Daniel Morgan stuff with some of what Francis Marion does. There are some things that are historically right, there are things that are extremely wrong in there. In the movie, they don't make him Francis Marion because they would actually have to have paid some royalties to the Marion family. So they had a fictional character that Mel Gibson played.
What happened if like a common person shot an officer? Did they get like in trouble?
Well, and this is where for some armies you might punish. That was like if you were our platoon leader and Jonah shot an officer, you might actually punish him for that because that other army might retaliate, and if they retaliate, who are they going to shoot?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's why it was, let's say, a gentleman's agreement, kind of that way. The rich were looking out, and this is where war after war is known as a rich man's war, but a poor man's fight. And even with some of the officers that are there. But this is where, in the Southern, they did not fight in that way. You look at all these lines all over, and this is where most of the time, and Nathaniel Greene kept retreating, and he kept making with the General Cornwallis, got him further and further and further into the heartland, and then would wait for him and attack. Cornwallis would actually split up his troops for a little bit. They come together, and it makes it where they are smaller. It makes a few tactical mistakes, but still nothing major along the way, but it's getting slowly wore down. Now, eventually they will go, and Cornwallis will come, and he will go to a peninsula. Now, if you are an army, why do you not take your army out onto a peninsula?
Is they gonna be cornered?
Yeah. 3 sides by water, just only one way in and out. But Cornwallis, and it makes him look like, oh yeah, he's stupid. He's one that goes down into that peninsula. He's not stupid. He always knows who's got his backside.
Navy.
Yeah, the Navy, the greatest Navy in the world. All right. Worst comes to worst, that Navy picks up his troops and takes them somewhere else. But here's where we will end up seeing, and this is several things that happen. As they go into this peninsula, Greene is chasing them in this direction. And George Washington comes down from the north. So we have 2 armies come together against Cornwallis's one. And we have a 3rd army. If you look at the name, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, Rochambeau. Guess where that 3rd army is from?
France.
Yeah, France. So we have 3 armies come in together where the British are on that peninsula. But no problem, because General Cornwallis has already sent a message to General Howe in New York to send other troops. But General Howe sends him a message after he is already there for a while that I'm not coming to help you. Still doesn't have a problem because he's still got the Navy on the backside, except for we will have de Grasse's French fleet will come in, and half of the British Navy that was supposed to come gets cut off from Yorktown by the French fleet. Not the American Navy. We don't have a Navy good enough to do that. So now Cornwallis is cut off at sea. Now I said half the French, or half of the British Navy. The other half of the British Navy was fighting a battle, what would actually be close to where Pensacola, Florida would be, against the Spanish Navy. Now, ultimately, what will end up happening is Cornwallis surrenders to Washington, and that is, he is the British general in there. This is the first battle that George Washington wins that is a truly major battle. Cornwallis has surrendered. Now, actually, Cornwallis didn't surrender. One of his other officers had to go out to do the ceremony to surrender because Cornwallis was sick and he just couldn't show up that day. Or did he not have the pride to, or was so disgraced that he's going to be the one surrendering to an American? And he could not actually go and do that, which didn't matter because his army surrendered. And again, kind of on how he won this battle, it was all three armies coming together. The French Navy, the Spanish Navy helping out. Now, I say, how was it different than all the others? Why was it that George Washington is suddenly aggressive? This is Mr. Retreat here. Mr. Tuck and Run.
He has the power to pack with his punches.
Not only has he punches and then with the power, this is the only time in the war that he had a bigger army than the one he was opposing. He had the advantage. It wasn't that he was scared to fight before, it's just he was smart enough that he's not going to take a small army and try to go against a bigger army. Now he has the advantage. He's not going to sit back. He would also do all kinds of things to trick Cornwallis to think that he has even a bigger army than he had. And I have a question here. This is kind of an odd one. It's actually to remind me of something to talk about here. How did a woman in New York make a difference in this battle? Anyone know what one woman could have made actually the biggest difference in American history for us becoming free? The general in New York was having an affair with this woman in New York and did not want to leave her company and wanted to stay in the city. And some people look at this as, and that's why he sent that message to Cornwallis there that I'm not coming. And some people will look at things and when studying it as the reason why is this general was more interested in his love life with his mistress than actually helping out in this war, figuring that Cornwallis is just Americans. All right, he really doesn't need my help. So it kind of makes it, and we look deeper into it there as a story. All right, miscellaneous things here to kind of finish up for the Revolutionary War. Marquis de Lafayette. Any guess what country he's from?
France.
Okay, France. Here. Two foreigners you must know that helped the Americans are Lafayette and von Steuben. Von Steuben from Prussia or Germany. Lafayette. He was a young French aristocrat. Has a lot of money. And he wants to fight Britain. Except for the beginning of the war, France wouldn't get involved. He comes over to help out George Washington. Brings with him money. Helps pay for some of the supplies. But what's actually even more important than that was the fact that he was also writing to France and telling them, hey, these guys can fight. This von Steuben guy is doing a pretty good job training them. And as the French are getting letters from him, the French leaders, they're also hearing from Ben Franklin some of the same things. So this is some of the part that will happen. And then when the Battle of Saratoga comes, that's when France decides to. So he is, and he's actually one of the most revered Frenchmen that America has. And we have a lot of places. I mean, here in Florida, we have Lafayette named after him. Fayetteville, Arkansas. Fayetteville, North Carolina. Now in Georgia, they don't call it Lafayette. They call it Lafayette there. But this is where we have a lot of places named after him. All right, John Paul Jones. We do not have much to say good for the Navy, but we actually do have for him. He is one time that we have that when he is on the Bonhomme Richard, which is Poor Richard, named as Poor Richard Almanac, he will end up defeating the British, and he is an example. He is one of our heroes. And pretty much to make it simple, is a naval hero that we have from this war. All right, rifles. We will have Some are called Kentucky rifles, some are called Morgan's rifles. They are different than what the British muskets were. They were longer. How is it being longer barrels first of all, a disadvantage?
With the bayonet, it's harder to fight.
Okay, it's hard to fight with a bayonet. What's another problem?
It takes the bullet longer to get out of the gun. It's longer.
Well, not so much not getting out.
Longer to reload?
Reloading, putting everything in. It is slightly longer getting out. Now, what's the advantage of these longer barrels?
Is it more accurate?
Yeah, they're more accurate. Plus, what they did is they put grooves in the barrel so that it spun. And so with that longer barrel and when it's spinning, it could shoot further and it was a lot more accurate. And this is where, notice for Morgan, I talked about Daniel Morgan, and one of the things that he had was sharpshooters. And that's why I told the sharpshooters, all right? Highest rank officer, go down, all right? And our Kentucky rifles. And this is where one of the advantages we will have over the British would be the fact that we have, in some ways, better weapons in that instance. We could shoot further out. We were more accurate. That you'd have. Not worth a Continental. The soldiers were getting paid in Continentals. What's dollar? If you're a person in a business, are you going to accept that money or are you going to accept the British pound? Yeah, the British pound. And why is Washington considered a great general when he lost most of his battles?
Because he won in the big picture.
Hey, won the big picture. He outlasted them. We ultimately won the war. The last thing here, the Treaty of Paris, 1783. This is what officially makes us the U.S. We declare independence in the Declaration of Independence. Going back to why did we get the Ohio River Valley and not France? Remember the last section? We had those two little battles, George Rogers Clark. We get all of this area. And what happens to Florida? Who gets Florida?
Spain.
Yeah, Spain gets Florida back, which they don't do much with it there. And no, we don't do reflection questions.